teachers are on administrative leave after asking their kids an ill-thought-out, meaningless question. For the first day of Black History Month, students were asked, how, according to the Code of Hammurabi, would you punish a slave that talked back to their master? A ridiculous mother broke out in tears.
He said, Mama, they was talking to us about slaves. And then he said he thought that was over.
Then, she went on to say that her son didn't understand the assignment, which is clear. Our first problem is that her son doesn't understand how hypotheticals work. Simply because someone asked, how would you eat that shoe, doesn't mean there's a chef in the kitchen ready to prepare it. But when she continued and said she didn't understand the question, that's when things got interesting.
Explain to me, why did you put that lesson out there? And did you ever read that sentence? Did you think that would bother anybody?
Now that's a good question. What, if anything, would a question like this teach a student? The Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest and most complete written list of legal codes, was etched into stone around 1792 BC. It was a simple list, 282 rules written in an if-then form. The then leader of Mesopotamia was pretty straightforward. If a slave disrespected their master in the way that slave did in this hypothetical question, the punishment was death. It even says so right on the tin. So why then would you spend time asking these students this question? I don't agree with the mother's premise of, did you ever think this would bother anybody? Someone being offended by the question is irrelevant in the face of the point, why write this question in the first place? Well, the answer to that was left out of the newscast. Despite the school completely abandoning the thought process behind the question when their story became city news, they ultimately expanded in a letter to students and parents, explaining, the purpose of the activity was to help students understand how order was kept in the early civilization, how the laws were developed, and how unjust they were. Now that opened things up. The newscast left us to believe numerous teachers walked up to their 6th graders and randomly asked them, how would you punish a slave? They didn't. They were trying to ascertain what the child would have done in lieu of killing the slave. Obviously, in retrospect, we can imagine 12 other different ways of wording it. If you were given power today, how instead would you punish the slave? But this isn't a class on morals and ethics, and no 11-year-old has the perspective to decide the punishment of another human being, slave or not. With this context, the teacher sounds significantly less insensitive, and if anything, simply inconsiderate. Now that we've given it some context, let's look at the problem of the modern-day parent's response. Supermom then went on to say that she was considering withdrawing her child from the school district.
When your 11-year-old is hurt by this, and but he can't really understand what's going on, that hurts you.
Before we get to the rest, I have to say, I'm sure this kid was confused, but I have a very strong feeling that it was her getting upset that upset him. How could he have become upset at what he didn't understand? He obviously has no bearing on history. Without history and knowledge of these events, how did he know to be offended by the question? He couldn't. But I'm sure it won't help him grow up to see his mother shrink in fear and cry on public television due to an inappropriate question asked in a 6th grade class.
To explain to him, it's not nothing wrong with him being black, and he is not a slave.
Who told her son there was something wrong with being black? Where did I miss someone calling her son a slave? That happened in class? Was that part of the lesson plan? Anyway, the school board then went on to say,
the district says the lesson is not consistent with the school board's vision for the district, its commitment to equity and cultural responsiveness, or the development opportunities they invested in their staff.
The head of the Boys and Girls Club had further thoughts. He told the superintendent that there needs to be a transparent investigation and a plan developed with white teachers and black families on how to move forward.
A lot of times these incidents happen, there's a statement that's put out, and then nothing ever happens. This needs to stop right here today. We talk way too much in Madison about these kinds of issues, and we can't have another generation of young people having these kinds of experiences.
These kinds of experiences? What does that even mean? We live in a world in which people say stupid shit all the time. I'd love to say that I don't care that the mother is threatening to move her child out of the district, but that would be a lie. To move her child out of the school would be to teach him that when he's offended by someone, he's well within his right to blame the entire institution and to leave. Those teachers should not have been put on administrative leave. They shouldn't have missed a day. They should have been forced to take mandatory insensitivity training, to come back to school and to apologize. Not for what they did, but that some of their students were offended by it. To remove those teachers from their classrooms would be to set a precedent that real life cannot manage to live up to. If this incident became a microcosm of real life, when that 11-year-old grows up and encounters his first boss, the second that boss says something that offends him, they will think back to the time that their teacher said something offensive and was removed from the position. But when they're offended 20 years from now, the people that hurt them won't go anywhere. They will sit in their seats of power. So that student needs to learn about misunderstandings. The student needs to learn that the teacher may have said something wrong, but it was not in an attempt to offend him. It was simply a very poorly thought out, if thought out at all, question. He also needs to be taught that yes, the chattel slavery of American history is gone. But no, that isn't over. There are slaves around the world today, put to work by people that are either greedy or misguided. But for that mother to openly consider moving her child out of the district, due to this incident alone, is to put him on a road where she might as well design his college safe space for him. On another note, come back soon. We're going to look into the significance of Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia being stripped from her committee, and how stripping her of all of them could be doing her constituents a disservice. But not education. She has no business being around the impressionable.